The ground trembles with a violence that defies belief. Stone temples shatter like glass, palaces crumble into dust, and entire cities vanish beneath waves of collapsing earth. This isn't a scene from a disaster film, but a reality that unfolded countless times across the ancient world, rewriting the fate of civilizations in moments. Imagine standing amid the ruins of a once great empire, where the very fabric of society was torn apart not by war or famine, but by the relentless power of earthquakes lost to time. These forgotten seismic events didn't just topple buildings, they toppled dynasties, erased cultures, and left behind mysteries that still puzzle archaeologists today. What if some of history's most pivotal moments, the fall of legendary cities, the abrupt disappearance of advanced societies, were triggered not by human hands but by forces deep beneath our feet? Beneath the layers of time lie clues, cracked foundations in ancient ruins, displaced megaliths that defy explanation, and myths passed down through generations, whispering of gods who shook the earth in anger. From the Mediterranean to the Andes, the ground has spoken with a voice so powerful it reshaped the course of human history, yet so silent that its echoes have nearly faded from memory. This is a journey into the shadows of the past, where geology and archaeology collide to reveal stories more dramatic than fiction. We'll uncover 25 earthquakes so devastating they altered the destiny of civilizations, yet so overlooked they've slipped through the cracks of history. Picture the Minoans, their vibrant culture snuffed out in an instant by a cataclysm so fierce it birthed the legend of Atlantis. Or the Indus Valley, where a thriving metropolis may have met its end beneath waves of liquefied soil. These aren't just tales of destruction, they're puzzles waiting to be solved, each tremor a hidden key to understanding how fragile our societies truly are. Ready to unearth the seismic secrets that rewrote humanity's story, let's dig deeper. The island of Thera, now known as Santorini, was once a thriving hub of the Minoan civilization until the earth itself tore apart in a cataclysm so immense it may have reshaped mythology itself. Around the year 1600 BC, the volcano at the heart of Thera erupted with such force that it sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean. The explosion was hundreds of times more powerful than the infamous Krakatoa, unleashing tsunamis that raced toward Crete just 70 miles away. The waves, some towering over 40 feet high, smashed into coastal cities, drowning ports and sweeping entire communities into the sea. But the water was only the beginning. Ash and pumice rained down for days, burying the sophisticated town of Akrotiri under layers of volcanic rock so thick it preserved the city like a time capsule. Walk through its ruins today, and you'll find frescoes still vibrant, pottery stacked as if waiting for use, and staircases leading to rooms frozen in mid-collapse. The people vanished, leaving no bodies, only echoes of a sudden evacuation. Some archaeologists believe this disaster inspired Plato's tale of Atlantis, a glorious island nation swallowed by the sea in a single day. The Minoans, Europe's first advanced civilization, never fully recovered. Their grand palaces at Knossos and Phaistos, already weakened by earlier quakes, now faced crippled trade routes and decimated fleets. Into this power vacuum stepped the Mycenaeans, warlike newcomers from mainland Greece, who seized control of the Aegean within generations. Thera's eruption didn't just destroy a city, it toppled an empire and rewrote the course of Mediterranean history. And yet, for centuries, the true scale of this disaster remained hidden beneath the ash, waiting for modern science to uncover its secrets. Far beyond the shattered shores of Thera, the disaster sent ripples across civilizations, even reaching the mighty Egyptians. The so-called Tempest Stele, erected during the reign of Pharaoh Ahmose I, describes days of unnatural darkness, thunderous storms, and chaos so severe it was interpreted as divine wrath. For decades, scholars puzzled over these apocalyptic descriptions, but modern geological evidence suggests they might record Thera's eruption. Traces of volcanic ash found in Nile Delta sediment match the time frame, hinting that the same cataclysm that buried Akrotiri also cast a pall over Egypt, blotting out the sun and unleashing freak weather. But the real devastation lay in the unseen connections between societies. The Minoans were the Mediterranean's great traders, their ships carrying olive oil, pottery, and tin, the lifeblood of Bronze Age commerce. With their fleet destroyed and ports in ruins, a sudden scarcity of tin, crucial for making bronze, rippled across the ancient world. From Mycenae to Mesopotamia, armies found their weapons harder to forge, and artisans struggled to maintain their crafts. The price of bronze skyrocketed, straining economies already fragile from climate shifts and political unrest. This wasn't just a trade disruption, it was a domino effect. The Hittites, starved of resources, clashed with rivals over dwindling metal supplies. In Egypt, crop failures sparked internal rebellions. Even distant Babylon felt the strain as luxury goods vanished from royal courts. Within a century, nearly every major Bronze Age power had crumbled or radically transformed. Thera's eruption didn't just erase a civilization. It helped unravel an entire interconnected world, proving how tightly human fates are tethered to the Earth's restless movements. And all this from a single crack in the planet's crust. Sparta prided itself on invincibility, its warriors legendary, its society unshaken by outside forces. But in the summer of 464 BC, the Earth itself delivered a blow that cracked Sparta's foundation in ways no enemy ever could. A massive quake, estimated at magnitude 7 or higher, ripped through the Peloponnese without warning. The ground heaved like ocean waves, toppling stone barracks and crushing entire families as they slept. Ancient historians like Thucydides describe cliffs splitting apart, rivers rerouting their courses, and a death toll so staggering it defied belief. 20,000 Spartans perished in moments, nearly half the city's population. The disaster struck at the heart of Sparta's rigid social order. With so many citizen soldiers buried beneath rubble, the enslaved Helots, who outnumbered Spartans 7-1, saw an opportunity to break their chain. Revolts erupted across the region, with Helots seizing fortresses and burning crops. Sparta's legendary military, now crippled by loss, struggled to suppress the uprising. For the first time in centuries, the city's iron grip on Laconia faltered. Desperate, Sparta did the unthinkable. It begged rival Athens for help. The Athenians, led by the ambitious general Cimon, arrived with 4,000 hoplites, only to be dismissed by paranoid Spartan leaders who feared Athenian influence. This insult planted seeds of resentment that would later bloom into full-scale war. Historians trace Sparta's decline not to battlefield defeats, but to this single geological catastrophe. The quake didn't just kill warriors, it shattered Sparta's aura of invulnerability, emboldening rivals and exposing fractures in its slave-dependent economy. Within decades, Athens would exploit this weakness, sparking the Peloponnesian War. The quake's aftershocks, both literal and political, proved that even the mightiest societies are at the mercy of the ground beneath them. Sparta's story serves as a grim reminder. Civilizations build their legacies on landscapes that can erase them in an instant. The city of Antioch gleamed as the jewel of Roman Syria, a bustling metropolis where Greek culture blended with imperial might, its streets lined with grand colonnades and opulent bathhouses. But on a winter morning in the year 115 CE, the earth convulsed with such brutality that in mere moments the city's splendor turned to carnage. The quake struck at dawn when homes and markets were full. Buildings pancaked into rubble, crushing thousands before they could flee. Fires erupted from overturned oil lamps, swallowing entire neighborhoods in flames. The death toll climbed to 260,000, a number so staggering it dwarfed even the worst battlefield losses of Rome's wars. Among the survivors was Emperor Trajan himself, who narrowly escaped death when the palace courtyard collapsed around him. Roman historian Cassius Dio recounts how the emperor was forced to crawl through a shattered window, his purple robes torn, his body bruised, an image of imperial vulnerability unseen in Rome's golden age. Trajan, then at the height of his power after conquering Dacia and Mesopotamia, suddenly found himself not as a conqueror of nations, but a witness to nature's indifference. His immediate response was uncharacteristically frantic. He ordered mass burials in pits to prevent disease, distributed imperial grain reserves, and even temporarily suspended taxes. But these measures couldn't mask the deeper crisis unfolding. Rebuilding Antioch drained the treasury at a critical moment. Trajan had been preparing campaigns to secure Rome's eastern frontiers, but now, gold earmarked for legions was diverted to quarrying new marble and importing Egyptian timber. Worse, the psychological blow shook Roman confidence. If even Antioch, a city protected by the gods of Rome and Greece alike, could fall so easily, where was safe? The quake's aftershocks rippled through politics. Trajan abandoned plans to annex Mesopotamia fully, leaving the region unstable. His successor Hadrian, facing emptied coffers, famously pivoted from expansion to defense, building walls instead of monuments. The disaster exposed the fragility of imperial logistics. Grain shipments meant for Rome's hungry masses were rerouted to Syria, sparking shortages in Italy. Artisans and architects summoned from across the empire left gaping holes in local economies. And in Antioch's ruins, a darker legacy took root: the rise of apocalyptic cults preaching that the quake was divine punishment. This wasn't just a tragedy of collapsed buildings, it was a seismic shift that cracked the very foundations of Roman ambition, proving that no empire, no matter how mighty, could outlast the earth's fury. Shanxi province slept unaware on that bitter winter morning in 1556, when the earth split open with a roar heard hundreds of miles away. The quake struck before dawn, collapsing cave dwellings carved into the soft lowest cliffs. Homes that had sheltered families for generations became death traps in seconds. Entire villages vanished into landslides, their names erased as completely as the lineages buried beneath them. When survivors clawed their way to the surface, they found a world unrecognizable. Mountains had shifted, rivers reversed course, and the Yellow River itself burst its banks, swallowing what the tremors hadn't already destroyed. The death toll defied comprehension: 830,000 lives lost, a number so vast it surpassed the combined populations of Europe's largest cities at the time. Ming Dynasty magistrates struggled to document the carnage, their brushstrokes faltering as they recorded villages where not a single soul remained to bury the dead. But the true horror lay in the silence that followed. Ancestral temples lay in ruins, their genealogical records scattered to the wind. For a culture built on reverence for lineage, this was a spiritual catastrophe. Entire family histories, painstakingly maintained for centuries, now reduced to blank pages. Yet from this devastation emerged an accidental revolution in agriculture. With Shanxi's workforce decimated, the Ming dynasty faced a stark choice: abandon the fertile but quake-prone lowest plains or adapt. Officials implemented radical reforms, redistributing land to survivors and promoting drought-resistant crops like sorghum over traditional wheat. Terrace farming expanded to stabilize fragile slopes, while new laws encouraged migration to repopulate the region. These changes rippled across Chinese society, altering diets, land ownership, and even the balance of power between northern and southern provinces. The quake's legacy lingers in China's collective memory, not just as tragedy but as a turning point. It exposed the fragility of human systems in the face of nature's whims, how one night's tremors could unravel centuries of social order. And it proved, as so often in history, that from the rubble of disaster sometimes rise the seeds of renewal, however painfully sown. Long before Thera's cataclysm sealed the Minoans' fate, the ground beneath Crete had been whispering warnings. Recent geological surveys reveal a network of hidden fault lines crisscrossing the island like scars, evidence of a massive earthquake around 1700 BC, centuries before the volcanic eruption that dominates history books. This earlier disaster didn't just shake buildings, it shook the very foundations of Minoan society, leaving vulnerabilities that would prove fatal when Thera finally erupted. Excavations at Knossos tell a telling story. The Grand Palace, famed for its labyrinthine corridors and bull-leaping frescoes, shows signs of hasty reconstruction, walls rebuilt slightly off-axis, floors patched with mismatched stones, storage rooms relocated to safer ground. These aren't just architectural choices, they're the fingerprints of trauma. Archaeologists found entire wings abandoned, their frescoes cracked and left unrepaired, as if the Minoans had redirected resources to more urgent survival. Even their art changed. Where once vibrant depictions of nature and ritual dominated, later works featured darker themes, collapsing buildings, figures fleeing waves, gods wielding thunderbolts. But the most revealing clues lie beneath the soil. Sediment cores from Crete's eastern coast show layers of liquefied sand, a telltale sign of violent shaking interspersed with building debris. At Malia, a secondary palace sank nearly 3 feet into the softened earth during this earlier quake, its lower chambers flooding with groundwater. The Minoans didn't just rebuild, they adapted, constructing lighter timber frameworks atop stone bases and shifting settlements inland. Yet every adjustment came at a cost. Trade routes once reliant on coastal ports faltered, forcing reliance on overland paths vulnerable to bandits. Stockpiles of emergency grain replaced luxury goods in storerooms. This seismic trauma created a society perpetually off balance. By the time Thera erupted, the Minoans were already stretched thin, their infrastructure weakened, their economy fragile, their collective memory haunted by ancestral stories of the ground's betrayal. When the tsunamis came, they struck a civilization already psychologically primed for catastrophe. The fault lines near Knossos weren't just geological, they were cultural, dividing the Minoans' golden age from their desperate twilight. What Thera finished, this earlier quake had begun proof that disasters aren't isolated events, but chapters in an unfolding story of resilience and ruin. Petra stood as a marvel of ancient engineering, a city carved into rose-red cliffs, thriving in the heart of the desert thanks to the Nabateans' genius for harnessing water. But in the year 363, a single night of tremors ripped through the city's fragile lifelines. The earthquake shattered the intricate network of cisterns, channels, and dams that had turned barren rock into an oasis, leaving Petra's fountains dry and its terraced gardens crumbling into dust. This wasn't just infrastructure damage, it was a death blow to a civilization built on defying nature's limits. For centuries, the Nabateans had mastered the art of survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Their water systems captured every precious drop of rain, channeling it through narrow, sick canyons into vast underground reservoirs. But the quake's violence collapsed tunnels, cracked cisterns, and shifted the very bedrock that anchored their aqueducts. Roman administrators who had absorbed Petra into their empire centuries earlier lacked the Nabateans' intimate knowledge of the terrain. Repairs lagged, and as sand clogged the broken channels, the city's lifeblood seeped away. The consequences rippled far beyond Petra's fading grandeur. As the city's markets dwindled, the lucrative frankincense and spice trade that had flowed through its gates began diverting to alternative routes. Roman merchants, now forced to rely more heavily on Syrian highways, faced higher costs and bandit raids. By the time Islamic armies surged out of Arabia in the 7th century, Petra was already a ghost town, its strategic value erased by that single geological catastrophe centuries prior. The quake hadn't just toppled a city, it had weakened an empire's grip on the region, leaving the door ajar for a new power to rise. Yet the most haunting legacy lies in the silence. Walk Petra's ruins today, and you'll find the remnants of water pipes still clinging to cliffs, their purpose obvious but their function long stilled. It's a stark reminder, civilizations can conquer deserts, outwit droughts, and build wonders, but only so long as the ground beneath them stays mercifully still. The clay tablets of Unearth still bear the frantic scratches of a scribe's stylus, his last words etched in panic as the ground shook and the sea roared inland. This wasn't just another raid or siege. This was nature itself turning against one of the Bronze Age's most sophisticated trading hubs. Around 1200 BCE, a massive earthquake struck Syria's coast, toppling Ugarit's towering walls and triggering tsunamis that drowned its bustling harbor. The disaster couldn't have come at a worse moment. Cuneiform letters from the ruins reveal a city already on edge, pleading with neighboring kingdoms for grain shipments as drought tightened its grip. One tablet, preserved mid-sentence, begs the king of Alashia for help. When your messenger arrived, the enemy ships were already here. Our crops burn in the fields, the earth shakes, and the sea swallows towns. Then nothing. The scribe's hand never finished the line. What makes Ugarit's fall so chilling isn't just the scale of destruction, but its role as a domino in the wider Bronze Age collapse. This was the Mediterranean's grand emporium, where Mycenaean pottery met Egyptian gold and Hittite iron. Its scribes kept records in 7 languages, its diplomats brokered peace between empires. When Ugarit fell, a critical node in the ancient world's trade network snapped. Ships carrying tin from Afghanistan, the lifeblood of bronze production, now had no safe port to unload. Within decades, kingdoms from Greece to Mesopotamia would crumble, their economies starved of essential metals. Geologists now trace the quake to a rupture along the Dead Sea Transform Fault, the same tectonic boundary that would later devastate Jericho and Antioch. But Ugarit's ruins tell a subtler story. Unlike Thera's volcanic ash or Petra's broken aqueducts, the evidence here lies in what wasn't rebuilt. The city's elite districts show signs of looting, but not by foreign invaders, by locals stripping valuables before fleeing. Storage rooms lie empty, not from plunder, but from organized evacuation. This was a society that saw the abyss coming and scrambled to survive, only to scatter into the hills and vanish from history. The real tragedy: Ugarit might have weathered the quake alone, but in its weakened state, drought-parched, politically isolated, its granaries half empty, the disaster became a death sentence. Its collapse left a gaping hole in Bronze Age diplomacy, severing communication between rival powers already teetering on the brink. When the so-called Sea Peoples began ravaging the coast a generation later, there was no Ugarit to sound the alarm or broker alliances. The earthquake didn't just destroy a city, it erased the glue holding a fragile international system together, proving that sometimes civilizations don't fall with a bang, but with a whispered plea for help that never reaches its destination. Constantinople stood defiant in the face of Attila's rampaging Huns, its legendary Theodosian walls towering as a symbol of Christian might against the pagan hordes. But those walls almost didn't stand at all, because just months before the siege, an earthquake tore through the city with such fury that entire sections crumbled like stale bread. In January 447, tremors shattered towers, split defensive ramparts, and sent panicked citizens fleeing into the streets, convinced the apocalypse had come. The timing couldn't have been worse. Attila, fresh from ravaging the Balkans, was marching east with fire and steel, his scouts already probing the city's weaknesses. Constantinople's fate hinged on a desperate race against time and against the earth itself. What happened next became legend. Thousands of laborers, from senators to slaves, worked day and night under the whip of Prefect Cyrus, patching breaches with anything they could find: broken columns, salvaged statues, even the marble slabs from demolished pagan temples. In just 60 days, they not only repaired the walls but reinforced them, adding an outer moat and secondary barrier. When Attila finally arrived, he took one look at the rebuilt fortifications and did the unthinkable: he turned away. For centuries, Byzantine chroniclers would claim divine intervention, that God himself had shaken the city to test its faith before delivering it from barbarian ruin. But the earthquake's true legacy lies in the shadows of that miracle. The frantic rebuild exposed Constantinople's fragile supply chains, with marble quarries in Proconnesus damaged by aftershocks, engineers resorted to looting older monuments, erasing chunks of the city's own history to preserve its future. Worse, the financial strain forced Emperor Theodosius II to slash military spending elsewhere, leaving key frontier forts under-garrisoned. When Attila shifted his wrath westward toward Rome, he found Gaul's defenses weakened by Constantinople's diversion of resources, a domino effect that would shape Europe's map for centuries. The psychological impact ran deeper still. The quake coincided with a solar eclipse and rumors of comets' omens that fueled fiery sermons from bishops like Proclus, who framed the disaster as punishment for lingering pagan sympathies. His hysteria triggered a new wave of Christian zealotry, with mobs destroying remaining temples and persecuting non-believers. The rebuilt walls didn't just keep invaders out, they became a physical metaphor for orthodoxy's triumph, their hastily patched stones literally embedding the rubble of paganism into Christendom's bulwark. This wasn't merely a narrow escape, it was a tectonic shift in how empires explained catastrophe. Where Romans once blamed restless gods or faulty engineering, now every tremor became a moral lesson. The walls that saved Constantinople didn't just change military history, they cemented an idea that would haunt medieval Europe, that the ground itself was a pulpit and its quakes the voice of an angry god. Attila may have spared the city, but the earthquake left scars no Hun could inflict. The Indus Valley civilization thrived along the banks of the Gagga-Hakra River, a waterway so vital it was considered the lifeblood of Harappan society until the earth shifted beneath it. Around 1900 BC, geological evidence suggests a series of massive earthquakes rocked the region, triggering a catastrophe far subtler than crumbling cities or tidal waves. These tremors didn't just shake buildings, they redirected the river itself, leaving farmlands to wither under the scorching sun and transforming fertile plains into salt-encrusted wastelands. Core samples drilled from the ancient riverbed reveal layers of sediment abruptly cut off, replaced by deposits of sand and gravel, clear signs of seismic activity rerouting water flow. But the real smoking gun lies in the soil. Archaeologists have uncovered fields near Harappan sites crusted with white salt deposits, a phenomenon called salinization that occurs when irrigation systems fail and groundwater evaporates, leaving behind toxic minerals. Crop yields plummeted, grain stores dwindled, and a civilization that once fed millions found itself starving. What makes this disaster so controversial isn't just the geological evidence, but the human response or lack thereof. Unlike other ancient cultures that rebuilt after quakes, the Harappans appear to have simply walked away. Their cities show no signs of violent destruction or invasion, just orderly abandonment. Streets once bustling with traders were left swept clean, as if awaiting a return that never came. Some scholars argue this reveals the Harappans' greatest strength, adaptability. Faced with an environmental crisis they couldn't fix, they chose migration over futile struggle, dispersing into smaller villages where they reinvented their way of life. Yet the river's betrayal left deeper scars than empty cities. The Gagga-Hakra's disappearance didn't just disrupt agriculture, it shattered a cultural identity. The Harappans had built their entire cosmology around water. Their elaborate baths, their intricate drainage systems, even their ritual seals depicting rivers teeming with fish. When the waters vanished, so did the foundation of their beliefs. Later Vedic texts from the region speak of a sacred river named Saraswati, lost to time, a possible folk memory of the Gagga-Hakra's glory days. The Indus Valley's decline wasn't sudden collapse but slow unraveling, a cautionary tale about civilizations built on landscapes they don't fully understand. Modern satellite imagery shows the ghostly outline of the Gagga-Hakra's ancient course, its path still etched into the earth like a scar. It's a silent reminder that rivers can be as fickle as fault lines, and that sometimes the deadliest earthquakes aren't those that topple walls, but those that steal the water and the hope beneath our feet. The Temple Mount trembled at the moment history would never forget, or so the Gospel of Matthew claims. According to chapter 27, at the exact hour of Jesus' crucifixion around 33 CE, the earth shook violently enough to split rocks and tear the temple's massive curtain in two. For centuries, theologians debated whether this was divine symbolism or literal geology. But modern seismologists have uncovered something startling. Sediment cores from the Dead Sea reveal a significant earthquake struck Judea sometime between 26 and 36 CE. The layers show disturbed deposits characteristic of seismic upheaval, right within the window of Jesus' final hours. Could this quake have been more than metaphor? Could it have shaped faith itself? Jerusalem's geography makes the story eerily plausible. The city sits atop the Dead Sea Transform Fault, a tectonic boundary capable of unleashing magnitude 7 or higher quakes. Engineering studies of Herod's temple, a marvel of ancient construction, show it was particularly vulnerable to seismic waves. The sanctuary's towering marble columns, designed to impress pilgrims, would have swayed dangerously during tremors. The massive curtain separating the Holy of Holies, woven from Babylonian fabric so thick it required 300 priests to maneuver, might indeed have torn under stress. For Jewish observers, such an event wouldn't just be structural damage, it would signal apocalyptic rupture. The Talmud even preserves traditions about temple doors mysteriously opening on their own before the destruction of 70 CE, possible folk memories of earlier quakes. But the earthquake's real impact may have been psychological. Roman records note that Pontius Pilate, already struggling to control restive Judea, faced escalating unrest after the crucifixion. A public quake during such a politically charged execution could have turbocharged rumors. Imagine the scene: Roman soldiers gripping crosses to steady themselves as the ground heaves, onlookers interpreting the chaos as divine judgment. For Jesus' followers, already reeling from his death, the timing would have felt unbearably significant. The Gospel writers, composing their accounts decades later, might have amplified the quake's role, but its seed was likely planted in real trauma. Archaeology hints at this cultural aftershock. Early Christian symbols in Judea frequently depict splitting rocks and trembling earth, motifs rarely seen in other contemporary faiths. The tremors' legacy extends beyond theology. When Jerusalem's Second Temple fell in 70 CE, survivors searching for meaning looked back to that earlier quake as a warning ignored. Jewish texts like the Book of Jubilees began framing earthquakes as moral wake-up calls, while Christian apologists cited the crucifixion tremor as proof of Jesus' divinity. 2 millennia later, the debate continues not just among scholars, but in the very stones of Jerusalem. Recent ground-penetrating radar scans beneath the Temple Mount show fractures aligned with first-century seismic activity. Whether one views the event as miracle or geology, one fact remains: sometimes the ground doesn't just shake civilizations, it shakes beliefs to their core. The towering walls of Turin still stand today, massive limestone blocks fitted together so tightly that legend claimed only the mythical Cyclopes could have built them. But these weren't just displays of Mycenaean might, they were feats of seismic survival. Around 1200 BCE, as palaces across Greece burned and kingdoms crumbled in the chaos of the Bronze Age collapse, Turin's walls held firm, not by luck but by design. Recent excavations reveal something astonishing. The Mycenaeans had engineered their fortifications to withstand earthquakes with sloping foundations, interlocking stones, and flexible timber reinforcements. This wasn't mere craftsmanship, it was a civilization's hard-won answer to the ground's treachery. Beneath the ruins, geologists have found proof of catastrophe. Soil samples from Turin show layers of liquefied sand, the unmistakable fingerprint of violent shaking, dating precisely to the era when the palace burned. But here's the mystery. While other Mycenaean strongholds like Pylos and Mycenae itself show signs of invasion and looting, Turin's destruction came from within. Storage jars were smashed as if in ritual, throne rooms deliberately torched. The walls stood strong, but something inside the society had snapped. Archaeologists now believe a perfect storm of disasters struck. Earthquakes weakened an already fragile system strained by drought, rebellion, and the collapse of Mediterranean trade networks. The Mycenaeans knew the dangers they faced. Their myths brim with geological anxiety stories of Poseidon the earth shaker and cities swallowed by the sea. At Gla, a lesser-known palace in Boeotia, engineers went even further than Turins, constructing entire platforms of crushed stone to absorb tremors. Yet for all their ingenuity, they couldn't engineer against the human fallout of disaster. When the quakes came, they toppled more than buildings. They shattered the illusion of royal invincibility. Linear B tablets from the period record desperate redistributions of grain and bronze, signs of a ruling class losing control. The real tragedy lies in what followed. As palaces fell, so did literacy. The intricate Linear B script vanished, leaving Greece in a 300-year dark age. Art regressed from vibrant frescoes to crude geometric patterns. Even the memory of earthquake-resistant construction faded until the classical era rediscovered it. Turin's walls endure as silent witnesses to a paradox. Sometimes the greatest civilizations don't fall when their engineering fails, but when their social fabric unravels. The stones remained, but the hands that shaped them forgot their purpose, a lesson in how quickly knowledge can crumble when the ground stops staying still. The merchants of Antioch never saw it coming. A tremor so violent it didn't just shake their city, it erased entire neighborhoods from existence. In May 526, as dawn broke over Byzantine Syria, the earth convulsed with a force that dwarfed even the infamous quake of 115. This time, the death toll reached 250,000, a number so staggering it left chroniclers grasping for comparisons. Procopius, the era's most meticulous historian, painted a scene of nightmare logic where the ground itself became liquid, swallowing families whole before fires sparked by overturned oil lamps and bakers' ovens raced through the ruins, trapping survivors in a maze of collapsing alleys. What made this catastrophe so devastating wasn't just its raw power, but the cruel historical irony of its timing. Antioch had risen from its earlier ruins as a Christian beacon, its rebuilt streets adorned with churches proclaiming divine favor. Just months before the quake, Emperor Justin I had launched a campaign to purge remaining pagans, framing the city's prosperity as proof of God's covenant. When the tremors struck during Pentecost celebrations, the psychological blow was apocalyptic. Churches collapsed onto packed congregations, burying worshippers beneath golden mosaics of saints and martyrs. The Great Church, a marvel of engineering, pancaked so completely that rescue parties couldn't even locate the altar. The disaster exposed the brittle nature of Byzantine crisis response. Unlike Trajan's era, when imperial resources flowed swiftly to Antioch, now bureaucracy and paranoia slowed relief. Emperor Justin I, already embroiled in tensions with Persia, initially dismissed reports as exaggerations. By the time aid arrived, disease had claimed thousands more. Grain ships meant for Antioch survivors were diverted to garrison troops on the Persian frontier, sparking riots among the starving. Meanwhile, Persian spies circulated rumors that the quake was divine retribution for Byzantine arrogance, a propaganda coup that would later smooth the path for King Khosrow's invasions. Archaeology reveals the quake's most haunting legacy in the silent stratification of ruins. Excavations show a distinct charcoal layer spanning the entire city, punctuated by eerie voids, air pockets where victims perished in trapped pockets. But the real tragedy unfolded in the decades after. Survivors who fled Antioch dispersed across the Mediterranean, carrying tales of the catastrophe as far as Gaul and Ethiopia. These refugees became unwitting agents of change. Skilled silk weavers resettled in Constantinople, shifting the empires. ECONOMI, Chinese letter engineers who had studied Antioch's failures redesigned ravenous churches with lighter domes and flexible foundations. The quake's aftershocks reverberated through theology too. Contemporary sermons shifted from triumph to trembling, with priests like Severus of Antioch preaching that even the righteous must fear the Lord's footsteps in the earth. This seismic anxiety seeped into art. Mosaics began depicting not just saints, but scenes of crumbling cities with inscriptions like "Memento quia pulvis es," remember you are dust. The disaster didn't just level buildings, it cracked the Byzantine psyche, replacing imperial confidence with a gnawing uncertainty that would linger until the rise of Justinian. Antioch would rebuild again but never regain its glory. When Khosrow's armies swept through Syria 20 years later, they found a shadow of the city that had once rivaled Rome. The ground had spoken twice, first in warning, then in judgment, and in its rubble lay a lesson civilizations ignore at their peril. Prosperity is no shield against the earth's indifference. The Mediterranean had always been Rome's lifeline, its waves carrying grain from Egypt, marble from Greece, and soldiers to distant frontiers. But on the morning of July 21, 365, the sea turned traitor. Off the coast of Crete, the earth ruptured with such violence that the entire island lurched upward by 30 feet in seconds. The sudden displacement sent a tsunami racing across the basin, its waves gathering height as they surged toward North Africa. By the time it reached Carthage, the wall of water stood over 60 feet tall, smashing through the city's famed circular harbor and flooding streets that had once echoed with the footsteps of Hannibal. Carthage's agony was just one scene in a Mediterranean-wide catastrophe. Contemporary accounts from Alexandria describe ships hurled onto rooftops, their cargoes of Egyptian grain Rome's breadbasket scattered like chaff in the brine. In Sicily, coastal villas collapsed under the force of the backwash, their mosaic floors buried under layers of sea sand and smashed amphorae. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, usually a model of Roman stoicism, wrote of fish left flopping in the forums of inland towns and survivors clinging to floating debris for days, drinking from the sandals of the drowned. But the real crisis unfolded in the aftermath. Carthage's port, painstakingly rebuilt by the Romans after its destruction in 146 BC, now lay choked with silt and shattered ships. With the harbor in ruins, grain shipments to Italy slowed to a trickle. Rome, already teetering under inflation and barbarian pressures, faced sudden bread riots. Emperor Valentinian, scrambling to stabilize the situation, imposed harsh new taxes on surviving African provinces to fund emergency imports from Gaul, a desperate measure that only fueled resentment. Within decades, these strained regions would welcome Vandal invaders as liberators, hastening the Western Empire's collapse. The disaster exposed Rome's fragility in ways no invading army could. For centuries, the empire had treated the Mediterranean as its private lake, relying on calm waters to bind its territories together. Now, nature had proven it could sever those connections in an instant. The psychological blow was profound. Coins minted in the years after the tsunami show Roma seated not triumphantly, but with head bowed, a personification of grief rather than power. Crete itself became an unwitting time capsule. Along its uplifted shores, archaeologists have found Roman fish tanks now stranded high above the waterline, their lead pipes twisted like licorice by the quake's force. These silent witnesses mark more than a geological event. They symbolize a tipping point in history. The Mediterranean would remain turbulent for decades, its waves now carrying not grain and legionaries, but the currents of change that would reshape the medieval world. The Carthage cataclysm didn't just flood a city, it drowned an era. Anjar's streets lay frozen in time beneath the dust, a bustling Umayyad city abruptly silenced when the earth split open in 749 CE. The quake struck with such precision that it toppled buildings almost vertically, entombing homes, markets, and mosques intact under their own rubble. What seemed like tragedy became archaeology's improbable gift, a snapshot of early Islamic urban life preserved like an insect in amber, untouched by later conquests or renovations. The city's layout reveals a paradox of destruction and preservation. Unlike other Umayyad centers like Damascus or Jerusalem, where centuries of rebuilding erased early traces, Anjar's ruins remained eerily pristine. Archaeologists lifting collapsed walls found coins still stacked on merchant counters, ceramic jugs mid-pour, even charcoal braziers with their last embers cold but unspilled. The quake's violence acted like a pause button, capturing moments of daily life mid-motion, a shoemaker's tools scattered near a half-stitched leather sandal, a scribe's inkwell overturned across an unfinished ledger. But the real treasure lay in Anjar's architecture. The quake exposed construction techniques lost to history, like the double shell walls designed to insulate against desert heat, or the hidden channels beneath streets that cooled homes via flowing water. Most startling were the hybrid designs blending Roman, Byzantine, and nascent Islamic styles, evidence of a cultural fusion later erased by Orthodox standardization. One collapsed mosque showed a mihrab aligned not toward Mecca, but an interim Qibla direction used only briefly in the 8th century, confirming debates in early Islamic texts. The disaster's timing proved equally revealing. Anjar was a pet project of Caliph al-Walid II, a ruler infamous for extravagance. His palace here, partially excavated, contained frescoes of hunting scenes, a taboo under later Islamic decorum. The quake's destruction coincided with al-Walid's assassination, allowing historians to connect geological strata with political upheaval. As Abbasid forces swept away Umayyad rule, Anjar's ruins were conveniently buried, sparing them the ideological purges that sanitized other sites. Modern laser scans reveal the quake's surgical brutality. The fault line passed directly beneath the city's commercial district, amplifying tremors in specific zones while leaving others eerily intact. This selective damage created a natural laboratory for studying seismic vulnerabilities, lessons now applied in earthquake-prone regions worldwide. But perhaps Anjar's greatest lesson is one of humility. The same forces that obliterated a city became its accidental archivists, proving that sometimes the earth doesn't just erase history, it writes it in stone. The Hittite Empire ruled Anatolia with an iron fist until the ground beneath their capital decided otherwise. At Hattusa, the mighty fortress city that had defied Egypt and Babylon, archaeologists uncovered something chilling. Temple walls blackened by fire, their cuneiform tablets bearing desperate prayers to the gods who shake the earth, written just before the flames came. These weren't ordinary invocations, they were the final pleas of a civilization that felt its foundations, both literal and political, giving way. Beneath the ash layers, the story grows more ominous. Recent seismic surveys reveal a web of faults crisscrossing Hattusa's bedrock, with evidence of violent shaking around 1200 BCE, precisely when the city burned. The temples didn't just collapse, they liquefied. Excavations show walls sunk crookedly into soil turned to slurry, their stone foundations swallowed like ships in quicksand. But the real smoking gun lies in the Hittites' own records. Tablets from the last days describe the ground growling like a lion and grain silos collapsing amid a critical wheat shortage. Even the royal correspondence hints at panic letters from vassal kings beg for troops to suppress rebellions, while the capital, usually swift to respond, falls eerily silent. What makes this disaster so pivotal isn't just the destruction, but the domino effect it set off. The Hittites were the Bronze Age's great stabilizers, their treaties and iron weapons maintaining a fragile balance of power. When Hattusa fell, chaos rippled outward. Without Hittite mediators, long-simmering conflicts between Assyria and the Levant exploded. Trade routes carrying Anatolian tin, essential for bronze, snapped, starving distant kingdoms of vital resources. Within decades, empires from Greece to Mesopotamia would crumble in what we now call the Bronze Age collapse. Yet the most haunting clue comes from an unlikely source, Hittite theology itself. In their final years, they began merging their storm god Teshub with Mesopotamian quake deities, creating hybrid prayers begging for the shaking to cease. This wasn't just religious adaptation, it was the dawning realization that their gods, like their empire, were losing control. Modern geologists have pieced together the likely culprit, a rupture along the North Anatolian Fault, the same tectonic monster that would devastate Istanbul in 1999. Hattus's ruins whisper a warning we're only now deciphering. Societies don't always fall to invaders or famines alone. Sometimes the earth itself becomes the executioner, and the prayers of the doomed, etched in clay, become its indictment. Antioch had already endured two devastating earthquakes, one in 115 CE under Trajan, another in 457 that nearly flattened the city, but fate wasn't finished with the Rome of the East. When the ground convulsed yet again in May 528, the tremors didn't just crumble buildings, they shattered Emperor Justinian's faith in the city's future. This time the quake struck with such calculated cruelty that it targeted Antioch's spiritual heart, collapsing the newly rebuilt Great Church during Pentecost services. Witnesses describe the dome splitting like an eggshell, its golden mosaics of saints and angels raining down on the congregation below. Yet the true tragedy wasn't the immediate carnage. It was the moment Justinian, reviewing damage reports in Constantinople, made a chilling calculation. The empire's resources were stretched thin by wars in Italy and plagues at home. Some cities, he decided, weren't worth saving twice. The numbers told a grim story. Where earlier quakes had killed thousands, this one claimed nearly 300,000 lives, a third of Antioch's population. The Orontes River, swollen with spring rains, burst its banks and swept through rubble-choked streets, drowning survivors huddled in shattered colonnades. But the knockout blow came months later when Justinian's engineers surveyed the damage and delivered their verdict. Antioch's water systems, already patched after previous disasters, were beyond repair. The city's legendary fountains, symbols of its Roman pedigree, would never flow again. Without functioning aqueducts, the metropolis couldn't sustain its population, let alone its status as Syria's capital. Justinian's response marked a turning point in disaster management. Instead of grand reconstruction, he authorized only basic repairs, redirecting funds to bolster Constantinople's defenses. Antioch's elite, sensing the imperial snub, began relocating en masse to the capital, taking their wealth and influence with them. The city's decline became self-fulfilling. As tax revenues dwindled, maintenance on critical infrastructure lapsed, making the next quake's damage even worse. By the time Persian armies sacked Antioch in 540, they found a shadow of its former glory, its walls crumbling, its forums half empty, its spirit broken not by invaders but by imperial abandonment. The quake's geopolitical aftershocks rippled far beyond Syria. With Antioch diminished, the Byzantine Empire's eastern frontier lacked a strong administrative hub. Justinian's successors would later scramble to fortify lesser cities like Aleppo, but none could match Antioch's strategic depth. This vulnerability became painfully clear when Muslim armies surged through the region a century later, facing disorganized resistance. Some historians argue the Sassanid Persians, observing Antioch's decline, grew emboldened to challenge Byzantium more aggressively, a chain reaction triggered by that fateful tremor in 528. Archaeology reveals the quiet irony of Antioch's fate. Excavations show later residents building lighter, single-story homes atop the ruins of grand Roman villas, practical adaptations, but also admissions that the age of monumental ambition had passed. The city's final humiliation came in the Middle Ages, when locals began dismantling its marble ruins to build humbler structures, erasing its own history one recycled stone at a time. The ground hadn't just shaken Antioch, it had shaken imperial priorities, proving that even Rome's heirs had limits to their loyalty when the earth kept betraying their investments. The Pyramid of the Sun dominated Teotihuacan's skyline, a monument so massive it seemed to defy the heavens themselves. Yet for all its grandeur, this architectural marvel held a secret vulnerability. The ground beneath it was far from still. New LiDAR scans have peeled back layers of volcanic soil to reveal something astonishing. Deep fissures radiating outward from the pyramid's base, their jagged paths mirroring known fault lines in the Valley of Mexico. These aren't cracks from time or erosion. They're scars left by violent tremors around 200 CE, quakes powerful enough to shift multi-ton stone blocks and tilt entire sections of Teotihuacan's sacred causeways. The real revelation lies in how the city responded. Excavations show workers didn't just repair the pyramid, they reinvented it. Layers of compacted earth and gravel were packed around its core, a makeshift shock absorption system centuries ahead of its time. Ritual offerings took on a desperate tone. Mass burials of jaguars and eagles near the fractures, their claws and talons arranged to mimic gripping the earth. One sacrificial pit contained dozens of obsidian blades stabbed vertically into the ground, as if pinning the soil in place. The message was clear. Teotihuacan's rulers saw the quakes not as geology, but as cosmic imbalance demanding blood. This crisis unfolded at the worst possible moment. The city was already straining under drought and mounting tensions between its diverse ethnic enclaves, Zapotec traders, Maya artisans, and Otomi laborers who'd once coexisted peacefully. When the pyramid cracked, so did the illusion of divine favor that glued Teotihuacan's social order together. Murals in the Street of the Dead show priests frantically recalculating astronomical alignments, their celestial calendars suddenly unreliable. Warehouse districts along the ancient shoreline of Lake Texcoco bear signs of rushed evacuations, with pottery abandoned mid-firing in kilns. LiDAR's most haunting discovery isn't the damage but the overcorrection. In their panic, Teotihuacan's elite launched construction projects of absurd scale. A new moon pyramid expanded plazas, even attempts to redirect natural springs. The labor demands backfired spectacularly. Skeletal remains from this period show spines deformed by carrying heavy loads, children's bones stunted from malnutrition. By 250 CE, whole neighborhoods stood half-finished, their stones left untrimmed as if the workers simply walked away. The quakes didn't destroy Teotihuacan outright, they lit the fuse for its slow unraveling. With its spiritual heart compromised and its rulers discredited, the city lost its gravitational pull. Traders shifted routes to emerging powers like Tikal and Monte Alban. Farmers, no longer trusting the gods to keep the earth still, migrated to smaller, dispersed settlements. By the time Aztec explorers rediscovered the ruins a millennium later, they gave it the name we know today, Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods, a poetic epitaph for a civilization that tried to outbuild the earth's fury and learned too late that no pyramid reaches high enough to escape it. Alexandria's harbor had long been a stage for power where Ptolemaic pharaohs once paraded their wealth, and Cleopatra staged dramatic entrances to dazzle Roman dignitaries. But in 365 CE, the Mediterranean rewrote the script. When the Crete tsunami surged across the sea, it didn't just flood Alexandria's shores, it drowned an entire epoch. The waves crashed over the royal quarter, submerging Cleopatra's palace, the legendary lighthouse's foundations, and even the marble steps where Julius Caesar reportedly stood surveying his lover's domain. In hours, the symbols of Ptolemaic glory vanished beneath the silt, as if the sea itself had voted to erase them. The timing was eerily symbolic. Just decades earlier, Emperor Theodosius had ordered the destruction of Alexandria's pagan temples, including the Serapeum, a spiritual heart of the old regime. Now, nature seemed to finish the job, burying the physical remnants of Egypt's Greco-Roman elite under layers of saltwater and sand. Divers exploring the harbor today find statues of Isis and Serapis lying broken beside Christian anchors, their juxtaposition a silent testament to this seismic shift in faith and power. But the disaster's true irony lay in its aftermath. As engineers scrambled to repair the harbor, they prioritized churches and bishops' residences over rebuilding the palace complex. The new Alexandria, rising from the brine, was a Christian city, its skyline dominated by the soaring Coptic cathedral where the pagan museum's library once stood. Even the lighthouse, that wonder of the ancient world, began its slow decay, its beacon now more symbolic than functional, like the fading memory of the Ptolemies themselves. The tsunami's geopolitical ripples spread far beyond symbolism. Alexandria's ports, crucial for exporting Egyptian grain to Constantinople, lay crippled for months. With food shipments delayed, riots erupted in Antioch and Cappadocia, forcing Emperor Valens to divert troops from the Persian front to suppress unrest. The logistical chaos emboldened Goth mercenaries along the Danube, who sensed imperial weakness and began pushing south, a pressure that would culminate in the catastrophic Battle of Adrianople 13 years later. Modern sonar scans reveal the eerie geometry of the submerged ruins' palace walls, aligning perfectly with Strabo's ancient descriptions, yet now home to corals and shipwrecks. Archaeologists debate whether the tsunami alone caused this subsidence, or if gradual sinking from groundwater extraction made the area vulnerable. Either way, the effect was poetic. The same waters that once carried Cleopatra's golden barge now guard her legacy in liquid amber, a fitting tomb for a dynasty that lived and died by the sea's whims. The Mediterranean giveth and the Mediterranean taketh away, sometimes in a single earth-shaking afternoon. The walls of Jericho didn't just fall, they resonated. For centuries, the biblical tale of Joshua's trumpets bringing down the city's defenses was dismissed as myth, but geology might hold the key to a startling truth. Around 1400 BC, the Jordan Rift Valley, a seismic hotspot where the African and Arabian plates grind against each other, was anything but quiet. Modern surveys reveal layers of collapsed masonry at ancient Jericho's site, their fallen bricks aligned in patterns that defy simple explanations of warfare or erosion. These aren't the orderly ruins of a siege engine's work. They're the chaotic aftermath of the earth itself lunging sideways. The science behind this is eerily precise. Jericho's famed walls, built with mud brick atop stone foundations, were uniquely vulnerable to a specific type of seismic wave called love waves, side-to-side ripples that race along the surface like a snake's undulations. When these waves hit freestanding structures, they create a phenomenon called resonant frequency, where vibrations sync with an object's natural rhythm, amplifying the shaking until collapse is inevitable. In Jericho's case, the wall's height and composition made them perfect candidates for this acoustic nightmare. Add in the Jordan Valley's soft sediment basin, which traps and magnifies seismic energy like a drum, and you have a recipe for disaster. But the real smoking gun lies in the timing. Archaeologists digging at Tel-es-Sultan, the mound where ancient Jericho once stood, found evidence of massive destruction around 1400 BC, precisely when the Book of Joshua places the event. The collapsed layers show no signs of prolonged siege or systematic dismantling. Instead, they resemble the aftermath of sudden, violent shaking. Bricks toppled outward as if pushed from below, storerooms buried intact with grain still inside. Even the famed burn layer, long attributed to Joshua's troops, could have another explanation. Earthquakes often rupture gas lines or topple oil lamps, sparking fires that spread uncontrollably, a tragic side effect of seismic chaos. The biblical narrative takes on new light when read through this geological lens. Joshua's trumpets might not have been instruments of war, but the earth's own roar. Ancient observers lacking modern seismology would have interpreted the rumble and collapse as divine intervention, especially if the quake struck during a ritual or battle. The Bible's description of the walls falling flat aligns perfectly with love wave damage, while the 7-day march around the city could reflect aftershock intervals common in Rift Valley quakes. Even the story's eerie silence before the collapse mirrors the sudden quiet that often precedes major tremors as animals flee and the wind stills. This wasn't just a local catastrophe. Jericho sat at the crossroads of late Bronze Age trade routes, its fall sending ripples through Canaan's already fragile political landscape. With the city's storied defenses gone, neighboring kingdoms faced a crisis of confidence. Tablets from Amarna, Egypt, mentioned desperate pleas for military aid from Canaanite vassals in this period, possibly reacting to the power vacuum Jericho's collapse created. The earthquake didn't just topple walls, it shook the region's balance of power, paving the way for new alliances and invasions. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from Jericho's own ruins. Beneath the collapsed walls, archaeologists found something unexpected. A row of standing jars, their contents preserved, as if placed deliberately to brace the foundations against future tremors. These weren't war preparations, they were earthquake adaptations, proof that Jericho's people knew the ground's treachery all too well. The city didn't fall because its walls were weak, it fell because no wall, no matter how thick, can outbuild the restless earth beneath it. In the end, the story of Jericho isn't just about faith or conquest, it's a reminder that sometimes history's most enduring myths are written not by human hands, but by the shifting plates beneath our feet. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro buzz with mysteries none more puzzling than the silent exodus that left this Indus Valley metropolis empty around 1900 BC. For centuries, scholars assumed invaders or climate shifts doomed the city, but recent discoveries point to a more insidious culprit, the Earth itself shifting beneath civilization's feet. Core samples drilled along the ancient Indus River reveal something startling: layers of sediment abruptly transitioning from fertile silt to parched clay, a change too sudden for mere drought. The Smoking Gun, a network of subsurface faults near Mohenjo-Daro's outskirts, their jagged paths suggesting seismic activity, rerouted the life-giving waters that sustained the city's genius. At first glance, Mohenjo-Daro seemed impervious to nature's whims. Its engineers designed the world's first urban sanitation system, with covered drains and wells spaced precisely 5 meters apart. But this hydraulic marvel depended on one fragile constant: the Indus' predictable flow. When tremors jarred the region's alluvial plains, the river didn't just shrink, it leapt, abandoning its channel like a serpent shedding its skin. Satellite imagery shows ancient riverbeds ghosting across the landscape, their curves severed mid-arc as if sliced by a blade. The city's final years whisper through the archaeology, wells dug deeper into hardening earth, brick-lined reservoirs enlarged in desperate bids to trap monsoon rains that never came. The tragedy lies in Mohenjo-Daro's adaptations. Excavations reveal citizens tearing up paved streets to plant crops in the rubble, their granaries repurposed as makeshift shelters. A child's toy cart found near a dry well bears scratch marks from being used to haul water over impossible distances. These weren't people succumbing to chaos, they were problem solvers fighting a war against the unseen. Their famous Great Bath, once the centerpiece of ritual purification, shows signs of being converted into a communal cistern, its sacred stairs worn down by countless thirsty footsteps. Debate still rages over whether the quakes alone transformed the Indus Valley. Some geologists argue seismic shifts merely accelerated a drying trend already underway, while linguists point to later Sanskrit texts describing rivers that walk as possible folk memories of tectonic upheaval. But the most haunting evidence comes from the city's meticulous records. Indus script tablets, though still undeciphered, show a sudden proliferation of one recurring symbol in the final layers, a wavy line crossed by a zigzag, eerily reminiscent of a river struck by lightning. Whether prayer or warning, it's a stark reminder. Even the most advanced civilizations are tenants on land that can evict them without notice. Mohenjo-Daro's legacy isn't just in what was lost, but in what its collapse reveals about human resilience. As the waters vanished, so did the social order they underpinned. Neighborhoods once segregated by class merged in shared struggle, their walls dismantled to build emergency irrigation channels. The city didn't perish in fire or violence, but in quiet transformation, its people dispersing into smaller villages, carrying fractured pieces of their culture eastward toward the Ganges. Those adaptations would birth new traditions, proving that while rivers may change course, humanity's thirst to endure never does. The real earthquake wasn't just in the ground, it was in the moment a civilization realized its greatest achievements could vanish as quickly as water into sand. The clay tablets of Nineveh tell a story the Assyrian kings never wanted recorded: how the earth itself turned traitor in their darkest hour. In 612 BC, as Median and Babylonian armies closed in on the once mighty capital, palace scribes scratched frantic omens about the earth roaring like 1,000 bulls and the great gates shaking without hands. These weren't poetic metaphors. Modern seismologists studying the Tigris River basin have identified sediment layers showing violent liquefaction precisely dated to the siege's outbreak. The same walls that had repelled armies for centuries suddenly developed cracks wide enough for a man to slip through. Their foundation stones jostled like dice in a cup by tremors matching intensity 7 or higher. What makes this disaster so strategic wasn't just the structural damage, but its timing. Assyrian military archives describe Median sappers tunneling beneath the walls, a tactic that would have failed against intact defenses. But when the quakes hit, they turned the city's moat into a death trap. Excavations reveal the normally dry ditch had filled with water from underground springs ruptured by the shaking, creating a swampy kill zone where Assyrian archers trained for dry combat floundered in panic. Babylonian chroniclers gleefully recorded how their enemies sank like reeds in the mud, their famed chariots immobilized. The psychological toll was even worse. Assyria's entire identity revolved around intimidating stability. Their propaganda showed kings standing atop mountains of skulls, literally above the fray. When the ground beneath Nineveh itself buckled, that illusion shattered. A recently deciphered tablet from the palace's final hours captures the despair, priests interpreting the quakes as the god Ashur stamping his foot in disgust, while soldiers whispered that even the earth wanted them dead. Within weeks, the invaders breached sectors where tremors had toppled watchtowers onto key armories, igniting fires that still left charcoal traces archaeologists can smell today. But the quake's cruelest twist emerged centuries later. Satellite surveys show Nineveh's ruins align with a previously unknown fault branch, one that runs directly beneath the royal armory. When the tremors hit, they didn't just crack walls, they snapped the bronze reinforcing bars inside them, leaving the city's vaunted weapons stockpile crumpled like tin foil. The Medes likely never knew their victory came courtesy of subterranean forces. For all their siege engines and battle cries, it was the silent grind of tectonic plates that truly doomed the empire built on terror. Nineveh's fall wasn't just a military defeat, it was the moment humanity learned even the mightiest fortresses are just sandcastles waiting for the earth's tide to come in. Pompeii's streets still bear the scars of a disaster before the disaster, cracks snaking through perfectly laid Roman stones like lightning frozen in time. 17 years before Vesuvius buried the city in ash, a violent earthquake in 62 CE struck with such force that it split roads down the middle, toppled temples, and left entire neighborhoods leaning at unnatural angles. This wasn't just minor damage, it was a structural warning cry, one that went unheeded as the city raced to rebuild before the Earth's next deadlier blow. The earthquake's devastation reads like a checklist of urban vulnerabilities. At the Temple of Jupiter, columns collapsed like dominoes, their marble drums scattered across the forum like discarded toys. The Grand Paelstra, where athletes once trained, sank unevenly into the softened ground, its swimming pool cracking open like an eggshell. Even the sturdy stone shop counters along the Via dell'Abbondanza, designed to survive riots and floods, crumbled under the shaking. But the most telling damage lay beneath the surface: ruptured aqueducts that would never fully regain their flow, leaving Pompeii reliant on makeshift wells when Vesuvius erupted. Survivors didn't just patch the damage, they papered over it. Frescoes in rebuilt homes show scenes of construction, their quick brushstrokes mirroring the rushed repairs outside. One famous mural even depicts the temple of Jupiter mid-collapse, its pillars tilting precariously, a rare moment of artistic candor about the city's fragility. Yet for all their efforts, the repairs betrayed desperation. Archaeologists found walls rebuilt with mismatched bricks, columns hastily propped up with cheaper tufa stone instead of marble, and once grand villas partitioned into smaller, shabbier units. The city's elite, sensing the growing risk, began quietly relocating to coastal estates farther from Vesuvius, leaving behind a population increasingly composed of the poor and the stubborn. The earthquake's timing proved cruelly prophetic. Pompeii's revival coincided with the rise of an unsettling new-fashion earthquake-themed decor. Mosaic floors began featuring chimeras and giants trapped under collapsing mountains, while garden statues depicted Atlas straining beneath the weight of the sky. Even graffiti took on a darker tone, with one scrawled prayer near the baths begging Vulcan to spare us from the fires beneath. The city's subconscious was screaming what its leaders refused to admit. The '62 quake hadn't been a fluke but a preview. When Vesuvius finally erupted in '79, the earthquake's legacy became horrifically clear. Streets already weakened by past tremors buckled under the weight of falling pumice, creating deadly sinkholes that swallowed fleeing citizens. Buildings patched with subpar materials collapsed faster under the ashfall, their makeshift reinforcements no match for nature's fury. Worst of all, those ruptured aqueducts left firefighters helpless as embers rained down, their hoses running dry within hours. The very repairs meant to save Pompeii had sealed its fate. The eerie lesson of '62 isn't just about geology, it's about human denial. Excavations reveal a theater still under renovation on eruption day, its scaffolding preserved in ash. In one workman's abandoned lunchbox, archaeologists found a note calculating wages owed for 32 feet of wall rebuilt. Life had gone on, business as usual, right up until the moment it couldn't. Pompeii's tragedy wasn't that it ignored the warning, but that it treated survival as a matter of plaster and paint, refusing to see the cracks running far deeper than its streets. The stone faces of Angkor Wat gaze serenely over the jungle, their smiles frozen in time, but beneath their feet, the earth tells a different story. In the 13th century, sediment cores drilled from the vast moats surrounding Cambodia's legendary temple complex reveal layers of jagged disruption, where perfectly stratified silt suddenly gives way to chaotic rubble. These aren't the marks of decay or neglect. They're the fingerprints of earthquakes powerful enough to fracture the Khmer Empire's lifeblood, its water. Angkor's genius lay in its hydraulics, a 1,000-square-mile network of canals, reservoirs, and barrages. Massive man-made lakes turned monsoon rains into a precision irrigation system, feeding rice paddies that sustained 1 million people. But recent laser scans of these channels show something unsettling. Long, linear fractures running perpendicular to the flow, their edges too sharp for erosion alone. Geologists recognize these instantly, their liquefaction features, where shaking ground transforms waterlogged soil into quicksand, splitting stone as easily as rotten wood. The timing couldn't have been worse. Tree ring data from the period shows the region already gripped by prolonged drought, its reservoirs shrinking under cloudless skies. When the quake struck, they didn't just crack infrastructure, they shattered the delicate balance between man and monsoon. The aftermath reads like an autopsy of a dying civilization. Inscriptions from the reign of King Jayavarman VIII speak of sky prophets warning of angry earth gods, while tax records show entire districts vanishing from the rolls after the waters turned treacherous. At the West Barre, archaeologists found sluice gates warped beyond repair, their wooden gears fossilized in twisted positions, testaments to desperate attempts to control flows that no longer obeyed human design. Worse yet, the quakes altered the very topography. LiDAR mapping reveals subtle tilts in the landscape, enough to divert entire canal systems away from farmlands they once nourished. A single tremor might have been survivable, but the sediment cores tell of multiple events over decades, each compounding the last like hammer blows to a weakening dam. Climate scientists now see Anka's collapse as a grim case study in cascading failure. The empire's elite, raised on myths of god-kings who commanded the rains, doubled down on grand projects to appease the heavens, building yet more temples while farmers starved. Meanwhile, the quakes had quietly rewritten the rules. Traditional monsoon patterns, already growing erratic, now faced unnatural obstacles: fractured aquifers, blocked springs, and reservoirs leaking through seismic cracks. By the time the Siamese armies arrived in the 15th century, they didn't so much conquer Anka as walk into its empty halls, the stones silent witnesses to an empire that didn't fall to invaders, but to its own unshakable faith in controlling the uncontrollable. Yet Anka's ruins hold an eerie modern warning. The same faults that doomed the Khmers still trace their fingers beneath Cambodia's soil, their movement measured in millimeters per year. Satellite data shows the Tonle Sap Lake, once the empire's beating heart, now tilting imperceptibly westward, a shift that would have terrified Anka's engineers. The jungle may have reclaimed the temples, but the earth remembers, and beneath those iconic lotus towers, the ground still whispers a truth every civilization learns too late: water giveth and the earth taketh away. The layer of scorched bricks and ash that Heinrich Schliemann triumphantly declared Priam's Troy might tell a different story under modern scrutiny. That infamous burnt city stratum, long attributed to Agamemnon's vengeful Greeks, shows patterns that don't match typical wartime destruction. Instead of concentrated fire damage near gates or armories, the burn marks radiate outward from fractured foundation lines like spokes on a charred wheel, a telltale signature of earthquake-induced fires. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal something Schliemann's pickaxes missed: zigzagging fissures beneath Troy's 7th settlement, their paths aligning with the North Anatolian Fault's restless branches. These aren't the clean cuts of sappers' tunnels, but the jagged wounds of seismic violence. The physics explain the peculiar destruction. When tremors struck, the city's tightly packed mud-brick homes likely pancaked onto their own cooking braziers, scattering embers across collapsed roofs. Oil stores in merchant quarters would have erupted into rolling firestorms, fueled by winds funneling through newly created rubble corridors. The timing transforms our understanding of the Trojan War narrative. Ceramic analysis dates this destruction layer to approximately 1180 BC, precisely when Linear B tablets from Mycenae mention Tarusa, likely Troy as a trading partner, not an enemy. Even more telling, Hittite diplomatic correspondence from this period speaks of earth-shaken Wulusa, their name for Troy, pleading for grain shipments after the earth gods grew angry. No Greek siege is mentioned, only starvation and structural damage. Homer's epic may have fused two separate catastrophes. Archaeological evidence shows Troy Via was indeed violently destroyed after the quake, but decades later by attackers who encountered a city already gutted and depopulated. The famous Trojan horse could be folk memory of seismic siege engines, the Greeks exploiting cracks in walls the earth had already undermined. Even the Iliad's description of Poseidon shaking the plain during battle takes on new meaning when read alongside geological reports of this region's frequent aftershocks. The real tragedy lies in the cultural confusion left in the quake's wake. With their city's true destroyer invisible, the traumatized survivors may have crafted the Greek invasion myth as psychological armor. Better to blame human enemies than admit the ground itself had turned against them. This pattern repeats across antiquity. From Jericho to Lisbon, societies often rewrite geological trauma as moral drama. Troy's burning lair wasn't just the end of a city, it was the birth of a legend where blame became more comforting than randomness. Modern excavations at Hittites continue to peel back the layers of this seismic sleight of hand. The latest magnetic resonance scans show something startling. Beneath the burnt city, earlier strata contain identical patterns of fire and fracturing. Troy didn't just fall to an earthquake once, it happened repeatedly across centuries, each disaster rewritten by survivors as heroic last stands. The ground remembers what epic poets forgot, that civilizations often crumble not from the sword, but from the silent shift of stones beneath their feet. The plains of Megiddo had witnessed countless battles, chariots clashing, empires rising and falling like the tides. But in 1130 BC, the real battle wasn't between armies, it was between the earth and history itself. A massive earthquake tore through the Jezreel Valley, shaking loose more than just soil. It shattered Egypt's grip on Canaan and unwittingly cleared the stage for one of history's most enduring cultures to emerge. Excavations at Megiddo's ruins reveal a layer of collapsed walls unlike any other. Debris not from siege engines, but from seismic waves powerful enough to topple Egyptian garrison towers like toy blocks. Here's the chilling detail. These walls didn't fall outward as if struck by invaders, but inward as if the ground beneath them simply dropped away. Among the rubble, archaeologists unearthed something revealing a shattered Egyptian stele still bearing Pharaoh Ramses VI's insignia, its fragments hastily buried beneath hastily repaired fortifications. The message was clear. Egypt's once unshakable authority in Canaan now literally lay in pieces. This wasn't just structural damage, it was a geopolitical earthquake. For centuries, Egyptian viceroys had ruled Canaan through a network of fortified city-states like Megiddo, their presence ensuring stability and submission. But with supply routes disrupted by landslides and granaries buried, Egypt's overstretched empire faced a brutal choice: pour resources into rebuilding distant outposts or retrench. Papyrus scrolls from Thebes reveal the fallout garrisons ordered to abandon the shaken lands beyond Gaza, their withdrawal papers citing not enemy forces but the anger of the earth gods. Into this power vacuum stepped the Israelites not as conquerors but as opportunists in the best sense. Freed from Egypt's heavy tribute demands, scattered highland clans began coalescing into something new. At sites like Shiloh, archaeologists have found simple farmsteads suddenly expanding into larger settlements right around this time, their pottery styles distinct from Canaanite or Egyptian wares. The Book of Judges hints at this transition, framing it as divine deliverance, but the real deliverance may have been geological. Without Megiddo's quake crippling Egyptian administration, the tribes might never have gained the breathing room to forge their identity. The disaster's aftershocks rippled through religion as much as politics. Egyptian texts from the era describe bizarre omens, priests interpreting the quake as Ammon's disapproval of foreign campaigns. Meanwhile, early Israelite poetry like the Song of Deborah celebrates how the mountains melted before their advance, possibly a folk memory of landslides triggered by the tremors. Even the name Armageddon, derived from Har Megiddo, Mount of Megiddo, carries echoes of this catastrophe, transforming a real earthquake into an apocalyptic symbol. Modern laser scans of the Jezreel Valley reveal the quake's hidden legacy. Fault lines branch like lightning beneath Megiddo's tell, their paths aligning eerily with ancient trade routes the Israelites later controlled. The ground that once shook empires had, in its upheaval, become the foundation of a kingdom. Megiddo's disaster didn't just level a city, it tilted the balance of history, proving sometimes the most powerful force isn't swords or chariots, but the silent shifting of stones beneath our feet. These 25 earthquakes aren't just footnotes in history, they're the invisible hands that reshaped empires, redirected cultures, and rewrote humanity's collective destiny. From the shattered palaces of the Minoans to the diverted rivers of the Indus Valley, Each tremor sent shockwaves far beyond the immediate rubble, triggering chain reactions that spanned centuries. The fall of Sparta didn't begin on the battlefield, it began when the earth swallowed its warriors whole. The Bronze Age didn't collapse from invasion alone, it fractured when trade routes snapped like brittle twigs under seismic strain. Even the rise of religions can be traced to fissures in the ground as desperate survivors searched for meaning in the chaos. But here's the unsettling truth: these are just the disasters we've managed to uncover. For every shattered city we've linked to quakes, how many more remain buried beneath layers of time and misinterpretation? How many mysterious abandonments or sudden declines in your local history books might actually be the work of forgotten tremors? Archaeology is only beginning to scratch the surface, armed with tools like lidar and sediment core analysis that reveal scars invisible to the naked eye. This isn't just about the past, it's about the fragile foundations of our own world. Modern cities sit atop many of these same fault lines, their skyscrapers just as vulnerable as Thera's frescoed walls or Antioch's aqueducts. The next time you visit an archaeological site, look closer. Those oddly tilted columns, the inexplicable gaps in fortifications, the layer of ash that doesn't match known wars. The Earth has been leaving clues all along, waiting for us to piece together its seismic storytelling. So take this curiosity beyond the screen. Visit your nearest ruins, whether it's a Native American settlement, a Roman outpost, or a medieval village, and ask what forces really shaped their fate. The ground beneath our feet has a memory longer than any history book, and sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from the artifacts we've preserved, but from the cracks we've overlooked. After all, the next civilization studying our collapsed cities might be just as surprised to learn how much of their story was written by the Earth itself.